Hey Soul Tribe, I'm KamalaDevi, and today's video is about the mother horror complex. So this immense cultural split between like the Madonna, like this revered goddess image of like mother and child, and the horror, like the sacred slut, the like the promiscuous one. And my come from in this share is to offer a transmission of how I reconciled some of that myself and how important it is in our culture to dissolve this kind of paradox, to actually bring it home and to heal it, to integrate it. So I want to share a little bit about myself, and then also, the more personal it is, sometimes the more universal, and to talk about what it means for the universe, what it means for the future. I am, self-identified as a sacred slut, and I'm proud to be promiscuous, and I'm happy to, share my love in safe, sane, consensual ways. I also have deep, long, emotionally invested and committed and attached relationships. In fact, I have multiple, a whole network of intimate relations. And many of you may know this, I have a 20, next year is going to be 20 years marriage with a teenage son. So it has been, 14 years that I've been on this healing journey, because when one has a child and there's a culture that has judgment and pathology around, it's I think probably the most basic way of saying it is there's the mother family PG, and then there's the rated R or X or whatever over here. And what'll happen for a parent who's identified with their sex positive community is they'll often either the community will turn on them or they'll turn on that in order to create space and create a nest. In fact, I told my husband when we were in our exploration of future possibilities, when we were just getting to know each other, talking about whether we wanted kids or not, and we were both already well into open relating. And I had said, I probably will want to date and play and explore until I get pregnant. And then I'm going to need a nest or a way of nurturing or toning it down. And that's what I thought. And of course, Michael being, devoted and being understanding that it's, it was kind of a feminist thing for him. It was about the woman's body and choice. And of course he understood that. But the irony is that when I had my baby, I had the opposite happen, where I was like, oh, it takes a tribe and I want more sex positive healing, particularly because I had the experience of postpartum depression. Now, some mothers get it, and it's a period of time that could be hormonal, and it could be, loss of identity, loss of purpose. It could be a lot of different reasons. In fact, there's I was at one point thinking about writing a book about 200, dimensions on which that kind of postpartum depression, it's really a portal that one will go through. And one of those dimensions for me was the loss of my eros, because, I was like a milk cow. I was producing milk, and it's a very sensuous experience, but it's also draining and depleting, and I don't feel sexy. And, it's the opposite. The pregnant woman, when you're pregnant and glowing, and there's often a mystique and a prestige to how beautiful a pregnancy is. And then afterwards, when you're in early motherhood and you have stains on your shirt and you've got, your body's changing, and the doctors prescribe no sex for 6 weeks afterwards. And there's a real loss there. And that identity can calcify into, okay, motherhood is not sexy. And then it's, how do I protect my child from sex, not talk about sex, not allow them to hear about that. And that is dangerous. Like, part of what I'm here to like raise my hand and say, okay, we need to interrupt this pattern right here, that divide of where communication gets split between parents, and their children. Because what we find is that when we don't talk to our kids about sex in a healthy, natural way, they will start to ask the locker rooms, and they will, get it on porn, and they're starting to get their information not from their parents, but from other places. In fact, they're like, no, 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 I don't want to hear that my parents have sex. Like, I don't want to know. And that's really dangerous. This idea of like, oh, I don't want my parents to know that my parents are having sex. It's so dangerous because it creates a split in our whole, it's a taboo. And the thing about taboos is that what happens in secrecy, where there's things we cannot speak of, it pathologizes. It actually creates an inability to change culture because there's something we don't speak of. So you can't change it. You can't question it. So that's why I'm raising my hand. I'm like, we need to question this premise. Because this idea that I don't want to learn about sex from the very people whose sex brought me into the world is what's keeping sex into the darkness and the shadows, which then manifests often into like the abuse or the neglect or the, sexual assault. And it's the secrecy and the lack of communication that can cause those things, or if not cause them, then doesn't allow for the healing of them afterwards. So as a sex and relationship healer, teacher, author, I feel very called to look into the future. Whenever I get a new client and we're talking about their sexual history and their sexual abuse in the history, we often go and look at the past. We look at their family of origin. We look at their past traumatic events. And there's so many times in which we look and we say, wow, in the family of origin, there was so much secrecy or darkness or misinformation that if that wasn't there, this wouldn't have happened, or that wouldn't have happened, or we wouldn't have had this kind of self-esteem or misinformation that led to that. And so it's almost like what I'm committed to now is, what does it look like to have integrated family, healthy communication about boundaries as well as consent and sex, so that we can heal the future and we don't have to go back into the past to do that. In other words, half of the challenges and problems that I deal with wouldn't even be there if we had healthier family education around sexuality. So I'm gonna stand for that. And I'm experimenting with it. I'm exploring. There's it's a pioneering thing. There's not a real clear path. This isn't how it's done. And big part of why it has to continuously be an experiment, love is a laboratory, life's a laboratory. No formula for how to raise kids is going to fit all kids. And families have their own dynamics. And so we, myself and other ISTA parents and facilitators are creating a space, and this will be our second experiment coming up this summer, where we can invite families to do this deep work and heal the lineages of pain, like ancestral pain or sex abuse that happened in our history can be passed on through generations. And, I bring that up because the work that I do is in sacred sexual shamanism. And shamanism really is about the multiverse and time traveling and working on multiple timelines. And so there's many other intentions and premises on which we're doing this laboratory, but I wanted to share this one thread, which is that the mother-whore split, this complex that's deep in our society, needs to start integrating. And when we can integrate the mother-whore complex, and we can say, yes, I'm a mother, and yes, I'm also a sacred slut or a whore or promiscuous. Like, I celebrate that, and I do it with consent and communication, and I can talk about my kid with my kids to the degree that they're developmentally interested. They're curious, they're open to it, not you know inflicting anything that they're not ready for, but developmentally we will transmit these teachings in a way that will support their growth and not contribute to the pathological taboo, shadow, darkness that we see in our culture. Like, our culture, and I say that so generally, I know, because it's not just American culture, although this experiment is happening in America. But having traveled around the globe doing this work, I would say that there's a sex obsession and also a sex repression. And it's like a schizophrenia. And for children too, where their bodies are changing and exploring, and it's the most natural thing in the world to be, youth has its eros, and it wants to taste and experience not just flavors, but sounds and music and dance, and like the natural impulse of life, the evolutionary impulse, if you will, is erotic. It involves all the senses. And then there's a developmental threshold, a point at which they start to adult. Like, there's an adulting process, and that will, start bringing this erotic life force to a place where you can actually create life. Really, what is the rite of passage by which a youth becomes an adult? And that's what I'm super interested in. Like, how can we instill like the responsibility of consent and the reverence of, like, now you're coming into your sexuality, and this is a really powerful, empowering moment that you want to wield responsibly. And what are those rituals, and how do we do that in a healthy way, so that kids don't just, run off to the alternatives that we know are insufficient sources in society. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you for listening. If you're interested in more information about family fusion, I'll include it in the link. But in general, I just wanted to bring awareness to this and be a part of a conversation with you. And I welcome your comments, and I look forward to more. Blessings.